The 10 most noticeably awful beginnings to a Formula One season. Lola's spectacular debut, 1997. Such huge numbers of new F1 groups have attempted and bombed as of late that it nearly detracts from the radiance of the Lola exertion. "We're here to win," strongly articulated 5 minutes before the collectors show up to seal up the base camp. Lola's endeavors bombed one race in, with the group carefully throwing in the towel after the principal race in Australia, where it qualified an incredible 13 seconds off the pace. Primary support MasterCard had compelled the outfit to get moving 1 year in front of timetable. The in-house V10 motor wasn't prepared and the T9730s hadn't seen within an airstream. What if, he asked? Ferrari's bomb trying guarantee, 2019. Ferrari started last year's F1 season as title favorite following the stellar performance of its SF90 car in testing at Barcelona. The new racing car featured sexy shrink-wrapped bodywork around the engine, an optimized cooling setup to ensure peak performance at the hottest races, and even switched to matte paint instead of gloss for the livery to save a bit of weight. The drivers were happy, pounding in preseason testing laps on harder tires and still beating the rubbish slower teams that had bolted on sticky rubber to impress the sponsors. And yet, Mercedes turned up at the first race and blew the doors off the Italians, triggering much internal angst for the prancing horse. The most sultry ever race in Argentina, 1955. F1 can be greatly bonkers. The big showdown was just 5 years of age when the most smoking ever race occurred in Buenos Aires, the season opener. The 40C normal was hot to the point that a significant part of the field wound up depleted, with 16 replacements occurring during the 3-hour run. Ferrari's extra driver Umberto Maglioli was close by and Maurice Trintignant resigned early. So they spent a great part of the race bouncing between the second and third put Ferraris, initially having a place with José Froilán González and Nino Farina. Stirling Moss and Carl Kling resigned without further ado into the race, so they had the option to share Hans Hermann's Mercedes. Unusually, the last Focus's counts were separated between the drivers of every vehicle, with the third-place Ferrari pilots getting 1.3 Focuses each. Superman Juan Manuel Fangio won the race in his Mercedes, one of 2 drivers to go all the way without anyone else, in spite of the fact that Roberto Mears completed 5 laps down. Fangio was left for all time scarred from consumes, supported by his leg scouring on the skeleton, which was being warmed by the fumes. The McLaren that never dashed, 2003. Recollect the late 90s McLaren was the group to beat, on account of the designing wizardry of Adrian Newey and over-the-top meticulousness of Ron Dennis. Mika Häkkinen reclaimed back titles in 98, 99, yet the wheels began to tumble off as the Michael Schumacher Ferrari blend arrived at its command. Häkkinen left the group in 2001 on a whole year and was supplanted by youthful hotshoe Kimi Räikkönen. Finns can just show signs of improvement, figuratively speaking. The 2002 season was a failure, however, with a single success for Coulthard in Monaco and Ferrari removing 15 successes from 17 races. Something radical expected to occur. Newey was released thinking of a spindly-nosed, firmly bundled mammoth. Game on. But the MP4-18 demonstrated hard to deal with was so firmly bundled that things continued liquefying and bombed the FIA's side effect crash tests twice. Goodness dear. While the new vehicle at last never hustled, an equal exertion was induced to update the earlier year's vehicle, the MP4-17D, taking Kimi Räikkönen to inside a sniff of the title. 2 Focuses down on Schumi. What may have been. Nigel Mansell doesn't fit at McLaren, 1995. Nigel Mansell was enjoying some real success in 1992, ruling the field and taking a conclusive title win for Williams. In any case, come 1993, The generally unassuming Brummy got irritated about most despised adversary Alain Prost joining the renowned, well, it was at that point, British outfit and frilled off to do a period of kart in the US. He won that title as well, since why not, yet 1994 was less fruitful, with an 8th place finish. With the season completing moderately from the get-go in the year, Nigel was sans left to sit down at Williams, tragically emptied by the passing of Ayrton Senna for the last 3 races of the year. He won the season finale at Adelaide after title contenders Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill dubiously bashed into one another. However, goodness, 1995. Williams selected to go with Scottish adolescent David Coulthard, so Mansell wound up at McLaren at the asking of title support Marlboro. Tragically it worked out that our Nige, not one of the most recent Age of Pony Racers style starving strays, didn't really fit in the MP4/10. Unbalanced. McLaren mechanics took a hacksaw to the vehicle and stuck it back together, however with more give in the cockpit, obviously, in an amazing 33 days. For which Mansell was extraordinarily thankful and ruled a season, taking a fourth, really, no. He wasn't content with the pace and treatment of the vehicle and resigned from McLaren after 2 races. F1 drivers take to the streets, 1982. FISA, which ran Formula One for the benefit of the FIA, had proposed new super license rules including a prerequisite to sign 3-year contracts with groups and a prohibition on expressing mean things about FISA. Withdrawing back to their lodging in a Mentor ferry, nearly a full field of F1 drivers blockaded itself inside a capacity room, hauling in sleeping pads for a residence-style climate with Gilles Villeneuve stimulating the ivories for amusement. Inevitably the drivers came out and dashed, as FISA made a couple of key concessions on the permit proposition. Yet the issues thundered on all through the season. The following round in Argentina wound up getting dropped in light of the vulnerability around the South African race. Fortunately, however, everything figured everything out and now nobody has any issues with Formula One. F1 introduces new nose regulations, 2014. F1 cars of the mid-2010s were almost universally ugly thanks to the FIA's baffling obsession with tinkering with nose regulations in order to improve some lofty notion of the show-up and improve safety. With the stepped noses of 2012-13, perhaps the sports bosses were hoping that they would scare cars out of the way. But further amendments the following year to lower the nose tip and led to much sniggering behind people's hands. The aesthetics of F1 car schnozzes in 2014 were uncharitably likened to anything from Gonzo off the Muppets to a tasty German sausage, via other seamier comparisons that our mothers wouldn't thank us for mentioning on the internet. The pinnacle of motorsport is used to controversy, but for the first time in its history it had to cope with being a bit of a laughing. Ligier loses its engines, 1987. Gallic outfit Ligier had appreciated a couple of long periods of relative solidness during the 1980s with its Renault motor arrangement, coming full circle in a 5th spot title finish in 1986, preceding the carmaker immediately left the game. Another arrangement with Alfa Romeo looked encouraging from the start. However, the group's frank French driver René Arnoux openly slat off the motors, saying they could scarcely last 2 laps without exploding, and disorder resulted. The organization had quite recently been purchased by Fiat, who would not like to be in F1. The Italians saw their chance and reassessed, leaving Ligier with a distraught scramble to locate another motor provider, missing the principal race. Its rebadged BMW units were called Megatrons, in any case, which is a lot cooler. Bar can't conclude how to paint its vehicles. 1999 English-American Tobacco showed up in F1 with a twist in the late 1990s. purchasing out the once incredible Tyrrell Group and tossing cash all over the place, employing blurring 1996 title holder Jacques Villeneuve simultaneously. There was much sniggering about the group's "A Convention of Greatness" motto and claims about winning races in its presentation season. Or quickly fell foul of the specialists, in any case, endeavoring to paint its vehicles in two distinct attires to advance brands in the BAT portfolio. The FIA concluded this was against the game's principles, following which the group endeavored to sidestep the intrigue strategies and went directly to the European Commission. All extremely untidy. Yet it would have been fine if the group had coordinated outcomes to its grand desire. Really, Barr didn't score a solitary point in its presentation season. Challenges. Things self-destruct in Argentina. 1980. It wasn't as hot as 1955, however the 1980 Argentine GP was another scorcher. And the warmth, joined with the gigantic ground impact vehicles and wide tires, implied that pieces of the infield segment of track fired separating during the end of the week. The vehicles actually drew the black top off the ground. The drivers quickly took steps to blacklist the race, which wound up proceeding following slapdash fixes. And just 7 out of 24 starters saw the completion. Alan Jones won the race on his way to the title, while a youthful Frenchman by the name of Alain Prost scored a point on his Formula One presentation. Comparative track issues caused issues at the second round in Brazil, making for a confused beginning to the year. Following some prominent mishaps later in the season, the game's specialists restricted ground impact tech in 1981.